Raymond told the last seller on the block. I know this because it was in a recorded phone call his attorney later produced, that my wife doesn't own anything here. He had been assembling that block for 7 years. He had negotiated 12 acquisitions, 2 rezoning hearings, and a pre-development budget of $340,000 without once consulting me. He was right that I did not own any of the parcels. What he had never thought to check in 7 years of title work he had paid other people to do was whether my grandmother's 1974 easement was still running across every single one of them. It was. My name was on it. The release was worth $380,000. The block could not close without my signature. Good day, dear listeners. It's Lena again, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tap the like button. It helps these stories reach the people who need them. And tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. I love seeing just how far these stories travel. People always say that the best way to own something is loudly. You announce it. You display it. You make sure the right people hear it. My grandmother disagreed with every word of that idea. She recorded a drainage easement in Hennepin County in 1974 and never once mentioned it at the dinner table. Not to her children, not to her neighbors, not to anyone who wasn't already standing at the title company when the instrument was filed. She trusted the record. She did not trust the announcement. There is a difference. The announcement can be forgotten, disputed, denied, misremembered, or simply never heard. The record does not forget. It sits in the county index where anyone who looks can find it, and it does not change its mind. I am a title examiner. I have spent 18 years in the business of finding exactly those things. The instruments that sit quietly in the county record while the people involved in a deal assume the title is clear. I have explained to developers, estate attorneys, and optimistic buyers why their transaction cannot proceed. I have done it patiently, and I have done it dozens of times. I know the particular quality of the silence that follows when someone realizes the record holds something they never anticipated. I grew up knowing that the record is the ground. Everything else is conversation. My grandmother taught me that with every document she ever filed, and she never had to say a word about it. The instrument was the lesson. Have you ever held something so quietly that the person standing next to you forgot to check whether it was there? That is a particular kind of patience. Not silence out of weakness, and not concealment out of strategy. Just the plain understanding that a recorded instrument does not require your advocacy. It is already there. It already holds. I am going to tell you what Raymond built without looking. I am going to tell you what my grandmother placed in the record in 1974. And I am going to tell you what happened when those two things finally found each other. I grew up in the Longfellow neighborhood in Minneapolis, 2 streets from a block that my grandmother, Estella May, had quietly shaped and held for 40 years. Longfellow is the kind of neighborhood that has always known its own mind. Old maples that reach over the sidewalk in summer and strip themselves bare by late October, leaving the light gray and flat and cold. Houses built in the 1920s, mostly with wide porches and narrow lots. A neighborhood that looks settled, because it is settled. People know who lived where. They know who owned what, or they think they do. My grandmother's house sat on the corner of the block. She had purchased it in 1961 when she was 28 years old, and she had spent the next 57 years understanding it thoroughly. Not just the house, but the neighborhood around it, the drainage pattern of the block, the shared rear lot geography, the quiet, practical arrangements that hold a residential street together over decades. Estella May noticed things. She recorded the things she noticed in the appropriate county instruments. That was her method. By the time I was 10 years old, I was helping her sort documents on the kitchen table on Sunday afternoons. Not legal work. She was not an attorney. But the ordinary documents of a careful life. Deed copies, tax notices, the occasional recorded easement. She kept them organized in labeled folders in a wooden file cabinet in the back bedroom. Practical, unglamorous, precise, she showed me the difference between the original and the certified copy. She explained what a legal description meant and why it mattered that every word of it was exact. I tell you this because it explains why, when I came to work in title insurance at 30 years old, the job felt like a continuation of something rather than a beginning. I already understood that the record was the ground. My grandmother had simply formalized the curriculum. Those Sunday afternoons at Estella May's table were not instruction in any formal sense. She never sat across from me and explained why an easement runs with the land and not with the person. What she did instead was let me watch her be careful. She would take a document out of its folder and set it flat on the table and read it from first line to last. And if she found something requiring attention, she would note it in the margin in pencil, not pen. Always pencil, and refile it in precisely the right place. She treated the record the way some people treat a garden, with the understanding that careful. Consistent attention produces outcomes that careless inattention cannot recover from. She was a private woman, not cold, but economical with disclosure. She never explained the 1974 easement to me. I learned about it only when the trust distributed in 2018 and the certified copy arrived with the distribution paperwork. I sat at my desk in the uptown office and read the instrument from first line to last, the way she had taught me, and I understood immediately what it was and what it meant. The drainage problem on that block had been real in 1974. She had solved it with a recorded instrument. She had placed it in a trust. She had put my name on the beneficiary line. She could not have known, when she did that I would one day work in title. She simply did what she always did, filed the correct instrument in the correct place, and trusted the record to hold it for as long as it needed to be held. The rest was mathematics. By the time I was 47, I had spent 18 years at a title insurance firm in Uptown, roughly 3 miles from Longfellow. The office is a warm, fluorescent room on the second floor of a building on Hennepin Avenue, with stacks of search reports on every horizontal surface, and the particular smell of copier paper and old coffee that I find genuinely comfortable. I wear my reading glasses on top of my head until I actually need them, which is to say, I wear them on top of my head most of the time. I am practical about my clothes and precise about my work. I have explained to a great many developers why a deal they believed to be complete is not complete. I have done it without pleasure and without apology. It is what the record requires. I had been married to Raymond Holbrook for 11 years at the time this story begins. We had met at an industry event. He was a residential developer. I was already in title, and we had built a life in Longfellow, in the house I had grown up near. Raymond was 12 years older than I was, and he had the particular self-assurance of a man who had completed 12 development projects and considered that a character credential. He was not unkind in the beginning. He was simply certain about his deals, certain about his industry, certain about the geography of competence. Development was his territory, and the domestic and professional details of the neighborhood were mine. And these were not areas that overlapped. I had understood for several years by the time this story begins that Raymond's certainty had become something more specific. He had decided that I did not have standing in conversations about development. He did not say this cruelly. He said it in the easy, almost gentle way of someone who has long since assigned roles and sees no reason to revisit the assignment. Development is not your area. That was the phrase. He said it at least twice that I remember, both times at the kitchen table, both times in the tone of someone clarifying rather than diminishing. I did not argue. I noted it. Now, the document that matters here. In 1974, my grandmother Estella May recorded a drainage easement in Hennepin County across the rear 15 feet of 6 adjacent residential lots on the block in Longfellow. The easement was a practical instrument at the time. The drainage pattern of that stretch of the neighborhood ran through the backyards in a way that created flooding problems during thaw. And my grandmother's solution was to establish a recorded right of access and maintenance across the rear strip of the neighboring properties. She negotiated it quietly with the adjacent owners, paid each of them a nominal consideration, and recorded the instrument with the county on a Tuesday afternoon in March. The easement was perpetual. It ran with the land. It covered all 6 parcels, including what would later become our marital home, and my grandmother, being Estella May, had placed it in a revocable family land trust the same year she recorded it. When she died in 2018, the trust distributed. The sole beneficiary named in the instrument was me. I took the certified copy of the 1974 easement to work the week after the trust distribution was processed. I filed it in a hanging folder in the cabinet beside my desk, labeled with the parcel numbers in the legal description, 6 numbers in the county system that I could have recited in my sleep. I filed it the way I filed every instrument I received, accurately, with the correct label. In the correct location. It was a recorded instrument. It belonged in the record system. Personally, professionally, it made no difference. The instrument went where instruments go. Raymond was, at that point, 3 years into assembling lots on that same block. He had not asked me about the title history, I had assumed, with the confidence of someone who considers title history the first and most obvious thing a developer checks, that he had done his own research. He was thorough, he told people. He had professionals. The title company would handle it. It never occurred to me that he had not checked. It never occurred to him that there was anything to find. I want to be precise about what that means, dear listeners, because it matters. I was not concealing the easement. There was nothing to conceal. The easement was a public record available to anyone who ran a title search on those parcels. The Hennepin County Recorder's Office had held it since 1974. A competent title search. The kind that any serious developer commissions before acquiring property would have found it in the first afternoon. My name was in the county index as the current beneficiary of the distributing trust, a matter of public record since 2018. This was not a secret. It was a recorded instrument. The only thing that would have hidden it is never looking. Raymond never looked. And I, in the quiet, methodical way my grandmother had practiced before me, did not volunteer what no one had thought to ask. The first warning arrived as an atmosphere rather than an event. This is often how these things begin. No single document, no single conversation, just a shift in the language. Raymond had, in the first years of the assembly, described the project as something shared in the vague, possessive way that married people often adopt about common territory. Our block. Our neighborhood. The development we were watching come together. Not that I had any professional role in it, but the neighborhood was mine too, in the way a place becomes yours when you grew up near it, when you know the names on the mailboxes. When the particular smell of a late October morning 2 streets from the house where your grandmother filed her documents is simply the smell of home. Somewhere around the 5th year of assembly, so roughly 2020, when Raymond had acquired 3 of the 5 parcels, the language shifted. Quietly, gradually, in the way that language shifts when the person speaking it has stopped maintaining a fiction without quite realizing the fiction has dropped. He began describing the project as his project in conversation with friends, not ours. His, the assembly he had spent years building. The deal that was finally coming together on his block in Longfellow. I noticed the shift. I did not comment on it. I did not rationalize it either. I simply stored it in the same careful way my grandmother stored instruments, accurately, with the correct label. The second sign was a document. Documents are my profession, and I find that, in the end, documents tell you things that people will not. In June of 2022, Raymond filed a permit application for the preliminary site plan for the 5-parcel assembly. The project address ran along our street. In the applicant field, the field that identifies the person or entity initiating the project, there was a single name: Raymond Holbrook. Not Francis Holbrook. Not Francis and Raymond Holbrook. Raymond Holbrook, residential developer, sole applicant, sole voice. I found this not because I was watching for it, but because permit applications are public record, and I had run a county database search for a different client that morning. The database returned Raymond's application as a related record for the parcel numbers I was cross-referencing. It was, from a professional standpoint, an unremarkable document. From a personal standpoint, it was the clearest statement Raymond had ever made about how he saw the architecture of our marriage. He was the applicant. I was not in the field. I printed it. I put it in a folder in my desk drawer, beside the hanging file with the parcel numbers on the tab. A title examiner learns not to draw conclusions from single instruments. You wait for the chain to tell you the whole story. The dinner in August 2022 was when the chain showed me the whole story. Raymond and I were at the kitchen table, the same wide oak table that had been in that house since before I moved in, the one his mother Ruth had given us as a wedding present. It was the kind of table that has heard everything a marriage has to say. Raymond was in a good mood. He had the energy of a man who can see the end of a long project from where he is standing. He said the final parcel, the 5th one, the last piece of the assembly, was nearly under contract. He said the project would begin permitting in the spring. He said, with a particular tone of a man describing something he had done entirely alone, "This one's finally coming together." I listened to that tone very carefully. Have you ever sat across a table from someone who is describing years of work in a neighborhood where you grew up, and realized that you are simply not in the picture they are painting? Not as a partner, not as a witness, not even as a background figure. Simply absent. That is a particular quality of absence. Not angry, not loud, just absent. I said, "Did you review the full title history on all 5 parcels?" Raymond said the title company would handle it. I said, "Of course." Those were the last words I said on the subject that evening. I did not raise my voice. I did not mention my grandmother. I did not say anything about the hanging file at work with the parcel numbers on the tab. I cleared the dinner plates, and I drove to the office the next morning, and I took the certified copy of the 1974 easement out of the hanging folder, and I confirmed the parcel numbers in the legal description against the 5 addresses Raymond had spent 7 years acquiring. All 5. Every single 1. My grandmother's drainage easement ran through the rear 15 feet of all 5 of Raymond's assembled parcels in a continuous strip from one end of the block to the other. Perpetual, recorded, running with the land. I read the legal description twice, not because I doubted it, because I am a title examiner and that is what you do. You read it twice. Then I closed the folder, set it on my desk, and called my attorney. I want to take a moment here to name what I was looking at, because I think it is important for you to understand the full weight of this thing before I tell you what happened next. The easement was not a technicality. It was not a dormant curiosity from 1974 that a title company might overlook or wave through as practically irrelevant. Under Minnesota title standards, the standards I have applied in my professional work for 18 years, any conveyance of property burdened by a perpetual recorded easement requires the written release of the easement holder before the transaction can close. No title company would ensure a transfer of those parcels without that release. No lender would fund a construction loan without clear title. No city permit office would approve a rezoning without a clean title chain. Raymond's assembled project, 5 parcels, $2.9 million in acquisition costs, $340,000 in pre-development work, 7 years of professional energy, could not move a single step forward without my signature on a release document. My attorney's name is Carol Reinhold. She has practiced real estate law in Minneapolis for 24 years, and she is the kind of attorney who considers precision a form of respect. I called her at 8:15 on a Wednesday morning and told her the facts, the easement, the parcel numbers, the trust distribution, the project. I kept my voice even because I was even. The thing I was describing was not a crisis. It was a recorded instrument. Carol said, "How long has Raymond been assembling this?" I said, 7 years. There was a pause, not a long one. Carol has heard a great many things across 24 years of practice. She said, "And he never checked the easement index?" I said the title company would handle it. She understood what that meant and what it did not mean. We discussed next steps. She advised me not to contact Raymond about the easement, to maintain my ordinary daily life, and to wait for the title search to surface the instrument. She said, "It will surface. It is in the record." She was right. Carol and I met in her office the following week to review strategy. Her office is on the 4th floor of a building in downtown Minneapolis, with a view of the Hennepin Avenue Bridge and the river below it. The water moving fast and dark in late October when the last of the autumn warmth has left it. She had pulled the trust distribution documents and the certified copy of the easement. She had printed the Hennepin County Instrument Index entries for all 5 parcels. She spread them on the conference table, and we sat on the same side of the table, the way I always prefer to review documents. Side by side, with the material between us rather than across from us. She said, "The instrument is clean, the description is precise, the distribution is documented, the beneficiary line is unambiguous." I said, "I know." She said, "Do you know what he paid for the 5 parcels total?" I said, $2.9 million. She made a note on her legal pad. "And pre-development?" I said, $340,000. She made another note. Then she looked up at me with the particular expression she has when she is about to say something important in a flat, factual voice. "Francis, the encumbrance release value on a perpetual easement covering 5 parcels in an active development corridor in Minneapolis in the current market is not small. We are going to commission a formal appraisal, but my preliminary read, based on 6 comparables I pulled from the state transaction database this morning, is that we are looking at somewhere between $380,000 and $420,000. I said, my grandmother paid $200 total in consideration to the 6 adjacent owners in 1974. Carol looked at me. I said, she understood what she was doing. Carol said, she certainly did. We talked for another hour. We discussed the timeline. The title search would almost certainly surface the instrument within the next 30 to 60 days, as Raymond's construction financing required a full title commitment before the lender would release funds. We discussed the formal notice I would need to file once the title exception was flagged. We discussed the negotiation structure. Carol's recommendation was to open at $410,000 and hold. She said, he will try to argue the drainage function has lapsed. That argument has been rejected in Minnesota courts twice in the last decade. A perpetual easement runs with the land regardless of whether the original purpose is currently operative. The title standards are clear. I said, I know. I've cited those standards to developers myself. Carol made one more note. Then she put down her pen and said, Francis, I want to ask you something directly. I said, go ahead. She said, are you prepared for what this will mean for the marriage? I looked at the river through her window. The water moving in that particular way of a Minnesota river in late autumn, deliberate and cold. I thought about the kitchen table where Raymond had told me that development was not my area. I thought about the permit application with a single name in the applicant field. I thought about Estella May on a Tuesday afternoon in 1974, setting her documents on the county recorder's desk. I said, I think the marriage told me what it meant some time ago. I've been reading the signs. Carol nodded. She did not say anything else. She collected the documents, set them in their correct folders, and handed me my copy. The pre-development costs Raymond had committed were $340,000. The 5 assembled parcels had cost $2.9 million. I had spent 18 years in the title industry, which meant I understood precisely what project suspension looks like from the inside. Lenders calling about the title exception, sellers getting nervous about delayed closings, the permit schedule falling off its timeline, the rezoning approval creeping toward its expiration. A project of that scale does not pause gracefully. It pauses with money attached to every hour of the pause. I understood all of that. I also understood that the easement was mine, that it was validly recorded, and that my grandmother had placed it in that trust in the same deliberate way she had done everything else in her careful, document-organized life. She had known exactly what she was doing in 1974. She had known exactly what she was building toward when she placed that instrument in a trust with my name on the beneficiary line. What I held in the hanging file beside my desk in the uptown office was a certified copy of a perpetual drainage easement recorded in Hennepin County in 1974, covering the rear 15 feet of all 5 parcels in Raymond's assembled development project, with my name in the beneficiary line of the distributing trust. What I had in the folder in my home office was the original family trust certificate, a single page with the beneficiary line in clear, unambiguous language. What I had in the county index was a public record that any competent title search would surface. The calm I carried through those weeks was not the calm of someone who was performing composure. It was the calm of someone who has read the legal description twice and confirmed the parcel numbers, and knows that the record does not change its mind. My grandmother had built the instrument. The record held it. I was simply waiting for the title search. The call came from Sylvester Armand. Sylvester is a title examiner at a firm on the other side of downtown. Not my firm, not Raymond's firm, but the company Raymond had retained to produce the title commitment for the assembled project's construction financing. He is 58 years old, meticulous, and the kind of professional whose reputation is built on never missing an encumbrance. He had not missed this one. He found the 1974 easement on page 11 of the 40-page title search report. In the standard format our industry uses, flagged in red at the margin, perpetual drainage easement, recorded 1974, Hennepin County instrument number, legal description covering the rear 15 feet of all 5 subject parcels, current easement holder Francis Holbrook per Family Land Trust Distribution 2018. Hennepin County Trust Records. Sylvester did something that speaks to his character. Before calling Raymond, he called his supervisor, who knew me from a shared committee at the Minnesota Land Title Association. His supervisor called me directly. The phone rang in my office on a Thursday morning in late October. The maples outside the window had already stripped themselves bare. I could hear leaves on the sidewalk 2 floors below. His supervisor said my name, identified himself, and said, "Sylvester found something on the Holbrook search. He thought you should hear it from us before Raymond does." I said, "The 1974 easement." He said, "You knew about it." I said, "It's in the record." I filed the certified copy when the trust distributed in 2018. Sylvester himself got on the line a few minutes later. He read me the flagged paragraph from page 11, not because I needed to hear it, but because he is thorough and he was confirming. He said, "Is this yours?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Then we have a problem." He meant Raymond had a problem. He said the formal title exception would go to Raymond and his lender by end of day, and that the transaction was on hold pending easement release. I told him my attorney would be in contact and thanked him for the call. I went home that evening and set the certified copy of the 1974 easement on the kitchen table. Raymond was not there. He was out at a project meeting. I made dinner. I waited. The certified copy is a precise document, 8.5 by 11. The county seal at the upper right, my grandmother's signature, Estella May Holbrook, in her particular forward-leaning cursive. At the bottom right, the legal description running across more than half a page in the small, compressed font that Hennepin County used in 1974. I had looked at that document dozens of times in the years since the trust distributed. I had handled it with the same matter-of-fact attention I give to any instrument in my files. But that evening, looking at it on the kitchen table, on the table where Raymond had told me that development was not my area, I was aware of it differently. Not with triumph. Closer to the feeling you have when a long completed calculation finally produces its answer in the real world. The arithmetic had been done decades ago. The arithmetic was right. Raymond came home at 7:30. He came through the kitchen door and saw the certified copy on the table and the title search report beside it. Sylvester's firm had, in fact, sent the full 40-page report to Raymond's email by the time he arrived. Raymond had already read his phone. He set his jacket on the back of the chair in the way of a man who is marshaling himself. He said, "What is this?" I said, "It's my grandmother's easement." He looked at the document. He was reading the legal description, the 6 parcel numbers that corresponded to every property he had spent 7 years assembling. I watched him read it. I have watched developers read title exceptions for 18 years. There is a particular quality to that reading. The eyes slow down, the nyem, the jaw sets, the hand sometimes goes flat on the table as if checking that the surface is still stable. Raymond's hand went flat on the table. He said, "You knew about this." I said, "I've known since 2018. I assumed you had reviewed the full title history." He sat down. Ruth, his mother, was visiting. She had been in the living room when Raymond came home, and she had come to the kitchen doorway at some point during our conversation. She was standing there now, 74 years old in a gray cardigan, watching her son read a title search report at the kitchen table, where he had once told his wife that development was not her area. The phone rang. It was Raymond's lender. I went to the other room while he took the call. I sat in the armchair in the living room, and I could hear Raymond's voice through the wall. Not the words, just the tone. The particular measured quality of a man who is managing an emergency and cannot let his voice show what his face already knows. The lender was calling about the title exception. The project was on hold. The construction financing was paused pending clear title. All of that was, from the lender's perspective, a matter of contract. The easement was in the record. The record was the ground. My attorney filed the formal notice of easement hold the following morning. One document filed correctly in the county system. The notice established the easement holder's position formally and on the record, which is to say that it did what instruments do. It made the thing official in the way that only the record makes things official. Raymond's attorney called Carol 3 times in the first week. The first call was hostile. I know this because Carol told me, in her precise way, that Raymond's attorney had described the easement as a dormant instrument with no current drainage function and therefore no compensable value, and that he had suggested, in a tone Carol described as confident, that I might consider releasing it as a good faith gesture toward the family. Carol said she had thanked him for the call and ended it. The second call was bargaining. Raymond's attorney proposed a deed transfer arrangement structured to give me a portion of the project's eventual profits. This is a common counter-move in encumbrance negotiations. When the cash figure feels too high, the encumbered party offers a future interest. Carol explained, again in her precise way, that profit interests in development projects are speculative, subject to the developer's management decisions, and not comparable in value to a certain present-day cash release. She countered with $410,000, citing a comparable encumbrance analysis from 6 Minnesota transactions involving perpetual easements of similar type and breadth. The third call was a request for a meeting. Before the formal negotiation, there was a period I want to describe carefully because it shaped what happened at the table. Raymond's attorney, in the days after the third call, made an attempt to argue the easement out of existence rather than negotiate its release. The argument took 2 forms. The first was legal. He circulated a brief memo through Carol, contending that the easement's drainage function had been rendered permanently obsolete by infrastructure changes to the neighborhood's stormwater system in the 1990s, and that under the doctrine of changed conditions, a court could be persuaded to extinguish the instrument. Carol responded with a 4-paragraph letter citing the 2 Minnesota cases in which nearly identical changed conditions arguments had failed, both involving perpetual easements whose original practical function had lapsed, and noting that initiating litigation to extinguish the easement would add 6 to 18 months to Raymond's project timeline, and that his construction financing timeline would expire long before any court ruling. The argument died with that letter. I know this because Carol told me afterward that Raymond's attorney had not followed up. The second argument was personal. Raymond, through his attorney, sent a letter to Carol, not to me directly, arguing that the easement had been placed in the family trust in 1974 without any awareness that it would one day be used as leverage in a dispute, and that using it as such was contrary to the spirit of the original instrument. Carol did not send a formal response. She called his attorney and said, in the flat tone she uses when a point requires no elaboration, that the spirit of a recorded instrument is its text, and the text was clear. She told me about the call afterward. She said, "He's reaching." I said, "He's been told that the record doesn't care about his interpretation." She said, "He knows that. He's not arguing for a judge. He's arguing for Raymond." What followed was a sequence of logistical complications that had nothing to do with the easement and everything to do with what a suspended project costs per day. Raymond's lender required a formal title commitment update every 30 days the project remained on hold. Each update cost Raymond's development company $4,500 in title fees and legal costs. 2 of the 5 sellers had closing contingencies that were running out. They had agreed to hold their contracts for 60 days pending clear title, but the clock was ticking. The rezoning approval that Raymond had obtained from the city for the mixed-use development had an 18-month expiration window. Every day the project stayed on hold was a day closer to the approval expiring and requiring a new application, new hearings, new fees. I knew all of this not because I was monitoring Raymond's project calendar, but because I have spent 18 years watching exactly these pressures build on encumbered development deals. The architecture of the problem was familiar to me in the way that a frequently read document is familiar. I knew which section would be under the most stress and when. Raymond's attorney filed a formal mediation request to Carol's office on a Tuesday. The meeting was set for a neutral conference room at a downtown Minneapolis title company. Not Sylvester's firm. Not mine. 11 days out. In those 11 days, I continued going to work. I continued reading recorded instruments, explaining encumbrances, telling developers why their deals could not proceed. I filed 2 new search reports. I attended the Monday morning staff meeting. I had lunch with a colleague at a diner on Nicollet on Thursday, and she asked how I was doing, and I said I was fine, which was true. I will tell you something about those 11 days that I think matters. I hear people ask, when they hear stories like this one, whether the person holding the leverage felt powerful. Did I feel powerful? No, power is a hot feeling. What I felt was closer to clarity. The kind of clarity you have when every document in a file is in order and the legal description has been verified twice and the record holds exactly what it holds and no one's feelings can change any of it. That is not power. That is just correctness. My grandmother had made something correct in 1974. I was sitting inside its correctness now, 50 years later. And it felt less like victory and more like confirmation. She had been right. The record had held. In those same 11 days, Raymond and I lived in the house that my grandmother had watched over from 2 streets away. We ate meals at the kitchen table. We said the ordinary things that people say when a marriage is suspended in that quiet pre-resolution state where neither party has yet said the words that will make the ending official. Raymond did not shout. I did not cry. We were, in the language of our marriage, professional about it. One evening he asked me, across the dinner table, whether I had planned this. I said, "Your title company did a routine search. They found a recorded instrument. The record was always there." He said, "You could have told me." I said, "You could have checked." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he got up and took his plate to the sink. Ruth was at dinner that night too, as it happened. She had extended her visit, which I understood. She was Raymond's mother, and she loved him, and she wanted to be useful in the way that mothers are useful in moments like this. Present, quiet, available. She had not said anything to me directly about the easement since the night I had set the certified copy on the kitchen table. But that evening at dinner, after Raymond had left the room, she remained at the table. She looked at her hands for a moment. Then she looked at me. She said, I was in the room when he said development wasn't your area. I said, I know. She said, I didn't say anything then. I waited. She said, I should have said something then. I did not know what to say to that. Not because I was without words, but because the acknowledgement was larger than I had expected it to be. And it landed somewhere I had not prepared for. I simply nodded. Ruth picked up her glass, took a small sip of water, and stood up from the table with the deliberate care of a woman who has decided that the right response to an honest admission is to let it stand and not diminish it with more words. She cleared her own plate and went to the living room without looking back. I sat at the kitchen table alone for a few minutes, in the house that my grandmother had watched over from 2 streets away, and I thought about what it costs a marriage to reach the point where the mother-in-law is the one who says the true thing. There is a detail from the pre-mediation session I want to share with you, because it matters to the story even though it was not, in itself. A dramatic scene. In the week before the negotiation meeting, Raymond's attorney had requested a pre-mediation conference to review the formal evidence. In that conference, which Carol attended and I did not, the recorded phone call was played back in the room. Raymond had been present. His attorney had been present. Carol had been present with a transcript. The call lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds, and in the second minute of it, Raymond's voice, recorded and clear, said, "My wife doesn't own anything here." Carol told me that Raymond had not said anything when the recording stopped. She said the room had been quiet for about 15 seconds. Then, Raymond's attorney had asked whether the transcript could be marked as an exhibit. And Carol had said yes. I asked Carol what Raymond had looked like. She said, like a man who is hearing himself for the first time. Carol prepared for the negotiation meeting with the detailed, systematic attention that defines her practice. She ordered a formal encumbrance valuation from a Minneapolis real estate appraiser who specializes in title encumbrance analysis. The appraisal came back at $405,000, based on the easement's breadth, the parcel values, and the development corridor classification. She had the 6 comparable transactions formatted into a clear exhibit. She had the Minnesota title standards printed and tabbed at the relevant section. She had the trust distribution documents, the certified copy of the easement, and the recorded phone call transcript, all labeled and organized in the sequence she intended to use them. The night before the meeting, Carol called me at home. She said, "You understand that we go in at 380 and we do not move below it." I said, "I understand." She said, "He may try to make it personal at the table." I said, "He can try." She paused. Then she said, "You know what I'm most confident about, Francis? Not the legal position, not the appraisal. It's that you are going to sit across that table tomorrow and be the calmest person in the room." I said, "My grandmother filed a document in 1974. The document did its job. There's nothing to be anxious about." Carol said, "Exactly. She was right. The negotiation meeting was in a conference room on the 9th floor of a building on 2nd Avenue in downtown Minneapolis. Glass on 2 sides, the gray October sky filling both windows. That particular flat gray that settles over Minnesota in the last days before the first snow, when the light is neither warm nor cold but simply absent. The kind of weather that is perfectly neutral. A witness, not a participant. I arrived before Raymond. I set the certified copy of the 1974 easement on the table in front of me, my grandmother's signature at the bottom, the parcel numbers in the legal description. I had placed the document in a clear archival sleeve that morning, a small, precise gesture that was pure professional habit. You protect the instrument. Carol sat to my left. Across the table, Raymond's attorney and Raymond. Raymond looked at the document before he sat down. He had read it several times by then, I knew. He had read it at the kitchen table the night the title search arrived, and he had read it again when Carol submitted the formal easement hold, and he had read it almost certainly the night before this meeting. But looking at it now, in a conference room where it was the subject of a formal negotiation, was different. It was different in the way that reading a document in your own home is always different from encountering it as an exhibit. The document had acquired the weight of its function. His attorney opened by reviewing the negotiation history, the initial notice, the $410,000 opening from Carol, the counter at $310,000, the profit share alternative that had been declined. He said the counter they were prepared to discuss today was $360,000, a figure that reflected, in his view, the limited practical drainage value of the easement strip. Carol responded. She was concise. She cited the Minnesota title standards by section. She cited the comparable encumbrance analysis, 6 transactions, average release value $391,000, median $384,000. She cited the formal appraisal at $405,000. She said we were prepared to accept $380,000 as the final figure. Raymond's attorney said $370,000. Carol said $380,000. There was a pause, not a long one. I looked at the certified copy on the table between us, my grandmother's forward-leaning cursive, the legal description that ran across 5 parcels and 50 years of neighborhood history. I looked at Raymond. He was looking at the document. He had the look of a man who has spent 7 years and $3.24 million, the acquisitions plus the pre-development costs, assembling something he was now learning he had never fully understood. Not devastated, not angry, at least not in a way that was visible in that room. Something quieter than that. Something that looked, from where I was sitting, like a man arriving at the full size of a mistake and finding it exactly as large as he had feared. His attorney said something to him in a low voice. Raymond looked up from the document. He looked at me, and he looked away first. His attorney slid the revised offer across the table, $380,000. Carol reviewed it. I reviewed it. The certified copy of the 1974 easement sat between us, my grandmother's signature, the parcel numbers, the perpetual easement language that had been in the Hennepin County record since the year I was not yet 3 years old. I signed the release. Raymond signed the payment agreement. We left the building separately. The gray October sky was the same on both sides of the door. The $380,000 came in 2 installments. The first, $190,000, arrived within 15 days of the signed agreement, transferred directly to Carol's trust account, and from there to mine. The second installment, another $190,000, arrived on the 30th day, exactly on schedule. Raymond's project closed 1 week after the final payment. The mixed-use development proceeded through permitting that winter and broke ground in the spring. The divorce was finalized 6 months after the negotiation meeting. I had retained Carol for that process as well. The settlement gave me the marital home outright, the easement payment, combined with my own savings, covered the buyout of Raymond's equity interest without requiring me to carry new debt. I have a mortgage now that I pay alone, on a house in Longfellow, 2 streets from my grandmother's block, in a neighborhood where the maples strip themselves bare every October and the light goes flat and gray, and the leaves blow along the sidewalk with a sound that I have known since childhood. That sound is simply the sound of home. Sylvester Armand sent me a bottle of good red wine when I was promoted to lead examiner at my firm the following year. His note said, "Always knew you were thorough." I opened the wine on a Friday evening and drank a glass on the porch, and I thought about the word thorough and what it means to be thorough in a profession where the whole point is finding what other people have missed. The mixed-use development on the block opened last spring, 4 floors of apartments above 2 retail units. A courtyard in the rear where the drainage easement strip used to run. I walked past it the day it opened on the way to the bus stop, and I stopped at the courtyard gate and looked in. A red maple had been planted at the center. Young, maybe 6 feet tall, the kind of tree that will take 20 years to become what it is going to be. I thought about my grandmother, who had planted things with the understanding that she would not necessarily be there to see the full growth. I thought about the Tuesday afternoon in 1974, when she had gone to the county recorder's office and filed an easement across a strip of Longfellow backyards and trusted the record to hold it until it was needed. She had been right. 50 years. The record had held it exactly. I continued on to the bus stop. The certified copy of the 1974 easement is back in its hanging file at work, in the cabinet beside my desk, labeled with the 6 parcel numbers as it has always been. I do not need to do anything with it. It has done what it was there to do. But I leave it in the file because it belongs in the record. And because my grandmother taught me, on those Sunday afternoons at the kitchen table when I was 10 years old, and she was explaining the difference between an original and a certified copy, that you do not remove an instrument from its place in the system just because the transaction is complete. The instrument is the record. The record is the ground. You leave the ground in place. My grandmother recorded an instrument in 1974 and trusted the county record to hold it. She was right. Raymond spent 7 years and $3.24 million assembling a project on a block he believed he understood completely, and he never once ran a title search on the neighborhood where his wife had grown up. The record was there the whole time. Anyone could have found it. He chose not to look. To Raymond, the easement was in the Hennepin County Index from the day it was filed. It was there when you made your first acquisition. It was there when you filed the permit application with only your name in the applicant field. It was there when you told the seller that your wife didn't own anything here. The record does not wait for you to check it. It is simply there. You just didn't look. What would you have done, dear listeners? Would you have told him about the easement before the title search found it, or would you have let the record speak for itself? Tell me in the comments. Share this story with someone who has ever been told they don't have a voice in something that was already theirs. And thank you, as always, for listening.